Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here with you today. I am looking forward to this action-packed Tuesday afternoon, and I think we're going to have some wonderful opportunities to grow together in the field of data science. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of IPDAY and then as well as myself. My name is Michael Johnston, and I feel very privileged and fortunate to be able to work with some data today through everyone that is here and encourage everyone to actively participate and then to also engage with me throughout this time period for us today. A lot of times when we hear about data, we sometimes can feel overwhelmed and we often don't know where to start, especially when the data is large. So in these circumstances, we're going to go through some fun experiences today. We're going to take some major Excel courses and condense them into a period of a two-part lecture series. And I see it's great to see people here as well. Thank you so much for the wonderful engagements and the welcome to all of our colleagues here. And I hope you are enjoying the state of Florida that we are in. So today we're going to talk about unlocking data insights. And we're going to dive into some slicers and that ubiquitous pivot table. And I'm sure that many of us have experienced the opportunities of pivot tables. And we're going to go through some basic data practices today in order to deploy these. The nature about what we are doing today is that we recognize that not a lot of our divisions have statisticians and data scientists readily available at beck and call to help with massive data, especially if we have to dive into opportunities for presentations or research, or for us to help design a story that is based off of the outcomes of your students. And that is why we are going to work today, so I can show you how you have the strength and the abilities to do exactly what I'm going to do today. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A. I promise I will not lose you. We are not going to lose you. I will often repeat myself twice, so that way I can demonstrate the practice. I can go ahead and then re-demonstrate the practice as well as you are working through it. So one of the best practices in this circumstance is this is going to be an environment that does not allow you to speak, but we will be actively monitoring the chat. And I have my chat right here next to me. I'm going to be looking through it consistently throughout the presentation, but this is also a recorded webinar. So at any time, if you want to go back and watch this, it's going to be uploaded on the IPDAY website within the next 48 hours. So this is going to be an active session. This is going to be an active session because we do not want to have me demonstrate this without you having the ability to do it. So this is going to be a session where I'm going to demonstrate the outcome, and hopefully you're going to be able to replicate it. But if you can't, that's okay. That's why we're here. We want to make sure that this is an opportunity for us to learn, and we've designed the experience such that you'll be able to go through and try this out independently, and the data and the availability of this is going to be open to you in 48 hours. So at any time, if you have not been able to do it along with us, there's going to be opportunities for us to dump into segmented sections where I've gone through and completed it for you. So don't feel like you have to give up, or maybe it's not your jam. It definitely is. I just thought I would give everyone a small indicator about the idea of dashboarding, because ultimately, this is going to be a way for us to learn some of the tools for us to create our own dashboards within Excel. And that is not something that is uncommon for individuals. You don't have to have graduate degree in statistics and data science anymore. There's a lot of great and quick calculations you can do internal. But one of the most important parts about designing effective visualizations, which is going to be the total part of our two-part series, is the ability for us to join harmoniously color schemes, making sure the dashboards flow and that colors are appealing to the users in order to attract subject matter experts and non-subject matter experts that do not know anything about your data. You want to make sure your color is not offensive. So this was an example of where I designed a slide that has a reference to the logo colors and the palettes associated, the palette association of the IPDAY logo that you see on the top header. I wanted to find colors that join harmoniously. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. There's actually a lot of studies that go into the impact of proper color schematics associated with data visualization. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is not just math and statistics involved with creating effective data models and visualizations. There's also a lot of the color scheme and the design and the feng shui of the way our data is presented. You will see that this is that first part of a two-part series. So in 2 hours, ladies and gentlemen, we will be able to design what we're going to show you in about 5 minutes. And we're going to work through this iteratively together. We're going to do some great practice. And we're going to also be able to explore and open up questions. And I see some fantastic individuals that are saying hello. And I see people from the entire spectrum of Florida, from different organizations. It's great to see you here and have you together with us. So in our next Tech Tuesday, we're going to take what we've learned today, and we're going to build upon that to actually create the dashboard and the visuals that we're going to use throughout the 2 days of the presentations. And the nice part is that the Excel that we're going to provide for you here is going to be a data set that is completely made up. I went through and made up this Excel, and I added a little bit of trend analysis in there in the data, so that way we can see some outcomes. But I promise you that this data is not too far from a real environment. We've designed the data to reflect that of an adult education environment. We're going to talk about attendance hours, one of those fields that we know and love dear to us. We're going to talk about demographics of students, maybe some risk associated with some data fields. So in the chat, you will see one of our colleagues, Joseph, was able to upload a link to an Excel file that I have listed there. So the Excel file is going to be IPDAY Data Insights V1. IPDAY Data Insights V1. So if you want to go to that link now and download that file, I recommend that on one side you have our Zoom up, and then potentially on your other screen, if you have two screens, you have this Excel file up. And the nice part is that if you only have one screen, we can work through this in a different session. You can actually have two screens, and hopefully you worked through that in the past before. This is definitely something that we can always explore too at a later time if you're interested. So great to see you, colleagues from Miami and from our technical colleges. It's wonderful to have everyone here present today. So hopefully we've all been able to download the data. If you've not been able to access the data or download it, definitely say something in the chat so we can explore and help you figure out the issue if you've not been able to download that data. But I have not seen anything in the chat, so I'm assuming that everyone is safe and we're good to go. Slicers. Slicers are fantastic, and often, many times, people are devoid of using them. And I know that often I don't want to use something if I'm not familiar with it. And that just makes sense. We feel comfortable doing things that we do on a daily basis. If we know something and we know it works, why do we want to go and expand or try something that potentially could not work or we don't know as well? And I think that's just the nature of change. And I also understand that's the nature of how we improve. So on the left side of this sheet here, we're going to see a situation with an Excel. And this is actually a picture from the Excel that you have on your dashboard. And what I did is that I just did the traditional filter. And I'm sure we've all had to filter data before. We've had to filter data to find outcomes. Maybe you've had to identify student populations that fall into a certain demographic based on criteria that you've been looking for, or maybe was asked of you. The filters are an impressive way to dive into your data to identify these anomalies and find these populations. But they don't have to be the way we currently do things. I know that if I look at situations where I have lots of rows of data, when I have to filter these rows, sometimes I forget which rows I filtered. And if I want to unfilter them, I fall into the complexity of identifying which ones I haven't filtered. But if you look on the right side of our screen, these are called slicers. So these are Excel's opportunities for us to use a visual ability for rapid filtering of your data set, and also any visualizations that you create with your data set, whether they be pivot tables, whether they are other types of visual analytics. They can be used in order to rapidly filter in between your data. But then also, I know that users much prefer to click on buttons. When we are now programmed our brains and everything we do on a day-to-day basis, whether it's our phone, whether we are using apps that are provided to us, we are very visual people. We don't want to add checkboxes anymore. Sometimes we do, but most often, if we can discolor or change the color of a field, or we have some sort of visual confirmation that we know what we did actually impacted our data, that's one of the reasons why slicers are so powerful, why they're so powerful. So in this situation, we're going to try the traditional way of filtering, and then I'm going to then design and show you how easy it is to input slicers into our data. So hopefully, if we have not seen this before, it's okay, because it's not going to take very long, but we will explore opportunities of doing this collaboratively. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is ultimately what we're going to design. This is a picture of the final dashboard from our two-day session, our two-day Tech Tuesday. we're going to be able to design the dashboard that allows us to dive into some data about the super smart adult education university and then its enrollment. So in this, you're going to see some visual data that is fun, it's inviting, it's consistent. You're also going to be able to click on some buttons. So we're going to do that together in a short couple seconds. So if I don't have any questions right now about our process, we're going to go ahead and open the Excel that you were able to download. So I do see that we had 2 new people pop in. I hope that you were able to see the Excel link that was put in by our IPDA colleague. If not, please let us know, and we can drop that link in the chat one more time. And this is going to be the data that we're going to work through together. So I'm going to go ahead and reshare my Excel. So I'm going to share my Excel, so that way we can start working through this collaboratively. So hopefully we are all able to see my Excel, the Excel that's up here. If you are not able to see it, let me know in the chat, so that way I can rapidly change. If you are able to see it, if you want to let me know, we can practice using the chat. I love the interactivity. I think that's one of the benefits of working in education. I love talking to people and helping others grow. And I've had so many people that have also done that for me. So hopefully we've opened this up. Thank you so much for confirmation. I appreciate that, Don. I appreciate you letting me know that you're able to see this viz. In this situation, so we're going to look at a couple different things. But first, before we dive into thank you so much, Marilise. Before we dive into it, I want to reference the color flow. And the color palette and color schemes are so important, but often overlooked when it comes to working with massive data. And I know that often I don't want to work in big data. I don't want to work with 100 columns and 500 rows. It's overwhelming. It could be a little exhausting. And there's no reason to do that in these circumstances where we don't have to. And that's one of the reasons why we can create these things. And the nice part about this is that once you create this using the methodology that we've learned, you can add new data to your data, new row lines. If you get new enrollment, if you get new courses, you can add to it. And these visualizations will then update automatically. So the great part about this is that you can actually create this once, and you can always change it. You can always evolve it. You can always add or subtract. But the nice part is that the data that populates this data, the metadata, we will be able to add or remove it at any time, so we can see how that data follows that trend. But noticing here, we have some similar colors. We have these orange and these blues, but it's nothing that's going to be too crazy. So I don't have a purple over here. I don't have a red down here. I don't have greens flowing through. The ability for us to look at this and be appeasing is very important for acceptance, user acceptance in data analytics. So let's go through and analyze these slicers. So hopefully we're all able to look at this, and at any time, if you feel that you've broken something, go ahead and reset your dashboard. Reset your dashboard, close it up, and then relaunch it. Relaunch the Excel. It'll come back up bright as new. And if you're unable to do so, please let us know in the chat so we can help walk you through that as well. These are floating objects. These are not, as you can see, you can drag them, you can float them around your screen. They do not have to be set in stone. So these are your slicers. I've just oriented them in a way that's visually appealing. And I'm going to go ahead and try doing some actions with our slicers. So for those who have not done this before, please go ahead and try this along with me. If you have done it before and you've actively used slicers and replaced with filters, that this is something you're going to learn. But we're going to take a couple minutes to orient those that have not used slicers and how to use them in data analytics and visual aids in Excel. So let's go ahead here, and we see that we have primary program of study. I have some displaced home worker data. I have some gender data. I have race white indicator, race black indicator. I have race native Hawaiian. And notice here that it looked like it was cut off, but the nice part about this is that if you hover over your data fields that you cannot see, it will expand, as you see there, that originally that floating text box popped up so I can see the expanded outcomes. And that also that will happen in terms of my cells. So notice here my selector, I saw that my selection was adult English as a SECA, and then it bleeped everything else out. That is something that we expect to have happen because we don't want to make these too long, but this is something you can see when you hover over, you can see the expanded outcome. In this situation now, I'm going to go ahead and dive into this, and I'm going to depress the slicer button. I want to see the population that is identified as Hispanic equal to Y, as a population that's identified as Hispanic equal to Y. In this situation, you'll know that my dashboard, all of these visual aids have updated. they have updated to re-aggregate the data based off of my selection on this slicer. So I basically applied a filter to every single visual aid in what I see now. And that's the power of dashboards. If you had to look at this independently, if I had to create a visual aid for all of the situations specific towards each one of these fields, I'd have a report that is hundreds of pages long. And that's not beneficial. That's not going to help any of us. But the nice part about us being able to dive in this data together in these dashboard visualizations allows us to tell a story and understand a trend. So I depressed my ethnicity Hispanic equal to Y, and notice that the X sort of discolored, it just became white. I can at any time, I can change my slicer and make it go back to the original. So by doing so, there's a little cup icon here with a red X that's up on the top, and I'll scroll in for us to be able to see that in better detail. So it is my cup with the red X. At any time, if I depress that, that's going to reset my slicer. So that basically sets it back to a new, but it also allows me rapidly to see what fields I've changed in my filters, which is not always easy to see when you have your big Excels. So I'm going to dive into this data, and I'll dive out a little bit. I want to find the data that's associated with certain populations. But first, I like to take a snapshot of what my data looks like now. So I can see that I have a pie chart. This looks like it's enrollment by program. I have some colors that are representative of populations. Awesome. I have some, oh, you're welcome. Yes, if you need me to zoom in, let me know. I will zoom in. I can talk about data for hours. I love data. I love being able to help others use their data and leverage their data. Yeah, if you need me to zoom in, definitely let me know. I appreciate you letting me know that helped you, Elaine. So looking at this now, I see average attendance hours by program and gender. Okay, average means it's a computation. And I see just visually that these look the same, these look the same, these look the same, and uh-oh, I see a difference here. I see a difference here. Hopefully, we're all able to see a quick visual difference there at this situation. So I'll bounce over to our average attendance by program and gender. So notice here, 124.14. Even if I don't know what this means, and I'm not a subject matter expert, most everyone can see that there's a difference between the big blue bar and the little orange bar. Does everyone agree that we can definitely see the difference visually? So that's going to allow people that are not mathematicians, not statisticians, you don't need p-values or logarithmic programming. You just need to be able to look at this and visually say that that is different. And that's going to allow us to dive in and figure out a story here. So as we are then exploring the rest of this before we apply our filters, we're going to be able to examine our GED completion by year. So this is going to be a temporal type of visualization. We have years as our independent variable. That's going to be along our x-axis, and we have total values here. And then these are interesting because these are percent of the student population that has different parents' education level. And this is going to be parent one level of education, and we see a value that is representative of graduate school, high school, no school, some college, and then unknown. And then we have the same thing for parent level 2. So in these situations, we see that we have numerical outcomes that are aggregate values. We have values that are averages, as we do in this visual aid. And then we have percentages that don't show total populations. And that's okay. Sometimes we only want to know things relative to an entire population. And that's the nice part about those that are designing. And for those that are in administration currently, that's where you can leverage and encourage these calculations that don't have to be done using long formulae. These are calculations that were done with click, point, and clicks, no long Excel formulae that can often be difficult. Also, diving back into our slicers, I do see that I have a question about how do you select multiple, and that's a fantastic question. So we'll see as I dive into each one of these slicers, when I left click, it does only allow me to select one. So you have two options. Let's say I click on the adult education program of study, and notice here that is just providing this population. I see enrollment by program going to one color, and then my data down here is changing. You can do two things. You can come over here and click on the checkboxes. This checkbox is called the multi-select option in your slicer. When I do so, now I can add that second group. So this is going to add the second group of data for us to then analyze as a group sum. I can go here and click on this third value, and now that aggregates and creates a group of adult education, adult English as a second language, and then adult general education. Adult general education development. So I have selected those three. At any time, just like we saw before, if I want to eliminate or go back to what I started with, I can click on my little cup with the X bar, with the X through it, and we go back to the beginning. So go through and play with this and see what you can figure out. See if you identify any themes in this data. I know that I can often see themes pretty easily when I start clicking around, and that's okay. If you don't, that's okay too. Sometimes it's like a puzzle. Sometimes it's a lot of data dive, and often when I can't see things by myself, when I bring in colleagues that maybe have an understanding or hypothesis of what they suspect is probably going to happen, we can use this as a way to validate that hypothesis, and that allows us to dive into this. So now let's go take some time to create these visual aids and these visual slicers. So I'm going to go ahead and just have a little sip of the coffee. The coffee helps the mind and the throat. And we're going to dive into this. So you're going to see here that we have 3 different tables associated with our data. Associated with our data. So we have the table all student data. This is called a table. We have the table attendance by parent ID, parent ed, and then we have the table attendance by race ethnic. These right here are our tables that we're going to look at. I will tell you that the nature of these tables has data that's completely fictitious, so this is stuff that I've made up. I did add a little bit of a theme to it, so we're going to dive into that when we look at our dashboard and understand thematic content associated with data, ways for us to tell stories in our data, and then you'll see that there are fields associated with our data. I know one thing that's important to me, ladies and gentlemen, is that when I work through data and I scroll down, one of the things that just drives me up the wall is that I can't see this first column. So immediately when I dive into data, I'm sorry, the first row, not first column. Immediately when I dive into my data and I know that I have more than a page of data, the first thing, how did I get to the data? So we open the data. Hopefully you were able to, hey, how are you guys doing? Hopefully we're able to see that on the bottom left, I have the enrollment viz. I just click over to the tab to the right, and I have all student data. Anita, let me know if you still weren't able to get there, but hopefully we're able to see the data is just on different tabs associated in our Excel. If you don't have the Excel, I'll let us know, and we can drop the link so you can download the Excel, Anita. And hello, colleague and friend from Tampa. So the first thing I like to do with this is I like to make this constant. I want to be able to scroll through my data quickly and make sure that I can see my headers. And this is called your header row. This is the data that has a field description, well, not a description, a field name. So we know what data we're working with. In your view column, awesome. Thank you so much, Anita. Thank you so much for dropping that link in one more time. I appreciate that. We see here in our view stance. So I come up here to view, and there's a button called freeze panes. So hopefully we're able to see the button freeze panes up here at the middle. When I click on this button, I have the ability to freeze panes, and this is specific to a location of where I keep my cursor, but I actually just want to tell it to freeze the top row. So when I say freeze the top row using my freeze pane option, I can then scroll, I can scroll to the right, and I never lose that top row. I don't lose that row header. So that's the first big help for me, is that I like to freeze that up. So here I have this data. This is long data. It goes over several different columns all the way to column AD. What we see on these other tables, attendance by parent ed and then attendance by race ethnicity, these are sub-data sets. So this is a sub-data set of this. So this is a sub-data set. They're the same data, but they're sub-data sets. And we're going to work through some smaller data first. And sometimes smaller data is a little bit easier for us to work with before getting into large data. So in our situation, I like to dive through and just take a quick look at our data, and I like to recognize the fields that we have. So notice here I have primary program of study, the major of the student. I have student ID, and this is very important when it comes to creating visual aids, that I have this ability for us to look at student ID that's unique to each row. It allows us then it allows Excel to do computations. I have some names, I have gender, I like that. I have education, military status, and I got some empty cells here. We're going to talk about the risk of empty cells. I have this parent status. I have displaced homemaker. I have Z's and A's, and oh goodness, I got Z's and A's. I say, what happened to the programming there? I have these nice fields here that I understand, but here I have Z's and A's. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. I have some ex-offender data. I have some runaway youth data, some long-term unemployment data, low income. I have the infamous attendance hours, because we love taking attendance, and being able.
Stand by. It looks like Matt, that mic has frozen for a moment. You're back.
I apologize about that. Thank you so much, June, for that pause there. I don't know what happened. That's, of course, the first time in years that I've frozen. But thank you for letting everyone know. But notice here we have the infant adult, the attendance hours, and notice this is very different because this is numerical data. And numerical data is very powerful because it allows us to do computations. And the computations can be as simple as average, mean, median, and mode. Median and average are much more powerful than mode, but that's the nice part about this numerical attendance data is it allows us to actually do some computations. And the nice part is we don't have to write a formula. We're going to leverage what Excel provides us naturally. Here we have some data about citizenship. We have some race data and ethnicity data, very important for us. We have some migrant data. So here's a whole bunch of data that we can work with. In this situation, I'm just going to go ahead and ask us to jump over to the attendance by parent ed table. So we're going over 1, 2, 3 tables to the right. And I'm just going to ask that we create a filter. And I'm going to ask that we create a filter. There's lots of different ways to create filters. You can jump over here to home. When I click on home, we're allowed to jump over to data, and we can just click on filter. And most of the times Excel will know what the fields are that we're trying to filter. And I'm sure we've all filtered before. We could have highlighted the first row and said filter. We could have, there's a lot of things that we could do. We could tell it just to filter. There's a lot of things that we can tell Excel, but hopefully we're able to create a filter on our first row. By doing so, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I want to filter by gender. I want to filter it by gender. And I want to find all of my males. So I have opened up the filter. I'm going to click over here on gender, and I want to click on the male population. So I'm looking here at my males that I've identified, and notice my data rearranges, and we've probably done this many times before, and I see that I have 124 out of 329 records. And again, we're on that attendance. Thank you, Elaine. We're on that attendance by parent ed. Now, let's say that I want to dive into my primary program of study, and I want to find all of my students that are adult ESOL, college and career readiness, and then also I want to find all of my adult English as a second language ESOL categories, programs of study. So I'm clicking on these two values. This allows me to select 2 at the same time, and then I click OK. And I say, OK, now I'm down to 23 rows of data. So it's filtered, I'm down to 23 rows of data, and now I'm just curious. I'm curious now, and I go back and I say, let's go and look at the high school of parent 1, the education of parent 1. And I dive into this, and I want to find the population that has no school. And now we're down to 4. Could we drop the link, please, for our colleague? Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Nicole. And again, it's welcome to see you. Now, here's the neat part about this, is that I see that I have 4 levels of data. I see that I have 4 rows. So if we need to find this population quickly, that's what we did. And this is last name 30, last name 110, student 220, and student 407. But can you look at this and tell me what you did to filter to get this data? I know I can't. And I don't remember half the time which ones I filtered. So it's not always easy to look at this and say, what did you filter? How did you do this? But ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be the power of the slicer. This is the power of the slicer. So I went through this data, very small data set. It is not large data. I can come back and I can look at these and I can say, oh, that's what I did. I want to just clear this filter. And then did I filter this one? I'm clicking on this. I didn't filter that one. Did I filter here? Oh, yep, I filtered. I can clear that as well. This is just very manual, and I can clear all those filters, which is what a lot of people have to do. But here's the next best thing. So in this situation, if we go to insert up here on the top left, so I'm going to wait and let everyone jump over here to insert, and on mine, that's adjacent to the home selection. I got home, insert, page layout. When I go to insert, does everyone see over here, hopefully somewhere on their Excel version, they see this term slicer? They see this term slicer. And notice it even actually gives a description. It gives a little description. It says, use a slicer to filter data visually. And that's the way we are. We're very visual people. Slicers make it faster and easier to filter tables, pivot charts, and cube functions. And for this circumstance, we are going to click on this, but look what happens. Oh, no. Oh, gosh. So many of us, when we click on that, we don't even want to go a step further because that just looks scary. We see connections. We say, oh, I don't want to use slicers. Do not worry. Slicers only work if you have a table, a special type of source of data that is Excel friendly. And I will show you, ladies and gentlemen, how easy it is to create a table. First of all, I'm going to do it 2 different ways, and I'm going to let everyone choose how they want to do it. In order for me to do this, I'm going to right-click here. So I'm going to create two different groups of this data. So I'm going to copy this table over. So I'm going to right-click over here, And I'm going to click move and copy. And I just want to create a copy of this attendance by parent ed. So you can do it this way. Hopefully we've made a copy of the data before. By doing so, now I have two different copies of the exact same thing and actually identified that as number 2. If you like just to do the point and click, you can hold the control button, left click and drag as I'm doing there, and you'll see my cursor changes. So what I did is I held control, I left click on this and I drag, and that also creates the third copy of the same data. So all of this is the exact same thing. And go ahead and create yourself a copy. So on this first one, all I'm going to do under insert is that I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on the table icon. And notice Excel has now highlighted in a green perimeter, a green floating perimeter that's moving around my data. And when I flow down here and I scroll down, I see that it's only encapsulating my data. So it's not going beyond my data. It's only encapsulating my data. It's actually told me over here in this floating box that where's your data located? This is just a fancy way for Excel to say it starts up here at the top left and it goes all the way down to H row 330. And then this icon here says, hey, my table has headers. Yes, it does. I'm going to click OK. And notice, you know that I converted the table to, I converted the data to a table because it changes the row lines. I have colors in my row lines that alternate. And that's one way that we are able to create our table. For those that are better at fast keystrokes, I will show you a trick that I use. So I'm going to take my hands and I'm going to go Control Shift End. So I hit Control Shift End up here at the top left. So I hit Control, holding down Shift, holding down End. I highlighted all of the data, Control Shift End. It allows you to highlight all the data. And then I'm going to hit Control A. And that will also I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go videoless because I think that could be part of my issue. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why I'm having camera issues. So in this situation, I apologize. I'm gonna go Control Shift End, and then I'm gonna hit Control T, and that will also create a table as well. So for those that like the fast keystrokes, you can use Control T, and that will also create a table. Or you can use a traditional method of just going to Insert and now adding the table. So now I'm going to work on my original data set. And now when I go to Insert Slicer, look what populates. Oh my gosh, how great was that? Now I'm able to see these fields. I'm able to see these fields. Primary program studies, student ID, last name, first name, gender, higher ed level parent 1, higher ed level parent 2, total attendance hours. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to make your life so much easier. So let's go ahead and apply those same filters that I did prior to this iteration. I'm going to go ahead and click on primary program of study. I'm going to click on gender, and I'm going to click on highest ed level parent 1. So I'll let everyone get to that, and I will do it one more time so we can all see how I perform that. So this, great question, Control plus Shift plus, okay, so in order to add the table automatically, you're going to do Control plus Shift plus End and END, thank you. Control plus Shift plus End. That will highlight all of your data. Thank you so much for that clarification. Control plus Shift plus END, end, and that's going to be upward of your up arrow key or below your home key. So Control Shift End will give us the highlight of your entire table. And then you would hit Control T, T as in Tom, and that would add the table. So back to our slicer edition. I'm going to insert, and I'm going to click, I go to Insert, and I click on Slicer. And now, since I've created a table, the slicers are able to populate. So I'm going to click on my primary program study. I'm going to click on my gender and my highest ed of parent 1, and I'm going to click OK. And notice these fantastic floating boxes have populated, and you can drag and you can move them all across your Excel. Fantastic, fantastic. I'm going to zoom out a bit so I can place them on the perimeter, so that way I can see how this impacts my data. So I'm going to go ahead and place my higher ed level 1 there. I'm going to place my GED there. I might move this over just a tad bit, just to make it look a little bit better. And I'm going to add my primary program of study. Notice the heights are all the same when you add them, but these are floating. And how Control Shift N. So the question was, how is Control Shift N different from the Control A? Those are the same thing. So Valeska, that is the exact same thing. Excellent point. You can Control A or Control Shift N in order to highlight your data. A lot of people love those fast keystrokes. I know I do. So Control A will highlight your data, all of your data, or the same as Control Shift End. They do the exact same thing. Valeska. Excellent question. But now, hopefully, we've all been able to add these slicers. Hopefully that when we've added these slicers now, we realize these are floating boxes. You can place them anywhere on your table that you like. You can place them anywhere on the table that you like. Now, when I dive into this, originally I selected all the students that were adult ESOL, college and career readiness. And then I also added in the adult English as a second language. If I want to add at the same time, I can either multi-select and then click the second one, or you can hold the control key down and that'll allow you to select multi as well. And then I think I selected the population that were males. And then I wanted to know the highest education of their parent one that did not attend school. And notice we got the exact same thing. We got those 4 rows of data. But here's the best part. I can look at this, ladies and gentlemen. This is visual. This is visual because I know exactly what I filtered in order to get this data. I know that I filtered on these 2 data fields. Whoops. I filtered on these 2 data fields here, and I filtered on the males, and I filtered on no schools, on no school. So you will see an interesting anomaly. Hopefully, as I dive into this, we'll see here that this color is slightly different than that color. I'm going to allow people to take a guess as to why they see a different coloration of that blue value. If you guys want to write in the chat why you believe there is a different color between these 2, that would be fantastic. And if you don't know, that's okay. Just say, hey, I don't know. I always like to see that participation. But noticing here very visually, something is going to be different. And does anyone have an idea as to what is different? Okay. Awesome. No results. Yes, exactly. So exactly, Patricia. Excellent. In this situation, with this combination of filters, the reason why this one shows up as a discolored blue is because these other 2 filters of gender male and high, because I start with the same, almost, not because they have the same titles, but very, very good hypothesis, is because of the combination of these other 2 filters, this population, even though selected as a filter, no longer applies. There are no males with parent highest level education 1 that is an adult ESOL college and career readiness student. And that is the reason as to why this shows up with a slightly discolored blue. So noticing here, when I remove the filter of the primary program of study, maybe this becomes a little bit more evident in your slicers. We see 2 darker blues and then 2 lighter blues. The reason why Excel does this is because Excel says that if you've selected no school male as 2 hard-coded filters, that there are no rows that will satisfy that exist in that combination. And that's the reason why they shade out a little bit. And that's one of the great, powerful ways that we can dive into our data, is that it allows us the ability to rapidly go through and look and say, hey, it's great that I selected this, but notice I have nothing left. But Excel told me that was going to happen because it was light blue. But when I select my adult ed field, there's data there. When I select adult English as a second language, this field, there's data there. So hopefully now we can see that our slicers are very powerful tools that will allow us to then aggregate and disaggregate our data. Very beneficial, great opportunities for us to dive into this data for helpful analytics. And the nice part about this is that it only took us a couple keystrokes to make. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd love to hear how we're feeling. We're a little bit past the midway mark. How are we feeling so far about slicers? Do we feel pretty comfortable with them? Do we want to try creating another table and adding slicers to it? I think that might be a good idea, but I'd love to know in the chat how you're feeling so far about slicers before we dive into creating some pivot tables. And in the meantime, it is okay if, okay, we want to definitely, I see some practice about another table. Awesome. That's the reason why I did it. So thank you so much for those responses. I appreciate you. Awesome. I definitely agree. This is so much faster than filtering. I wish someone would have taught me about this when this first came out in 2016, but I only learned about it a little bit later. But you know what? There's nothing wrong for our continual evolution of learning, and that's why we do what we do. So here in our attendance by race and ethnicity, I'm going to ask everyone to identify all students who are Hispanic and have a program of study of, let's say, adult education. And all my spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes are intentional. So they all are intentional. So this is going to be our data dive. We want to identify all students that are Hispanic equal to yes, and we want to identify all of the students that are Hispanic and all of them that are also majoring in adult education. So for purposes of going forward, I'm going to insert my table and notice, look what happened. No, I don't want to include this field over here. Excel's not picked up on that. So notice when I insert that table, that's not what I want. When I click this table here, I put that field name in there and I put that little note for everyone. And now Excel thinks that's part of my table and it's not. So that's one of the nice parts about using the Control A function. Oh my goodness, look what happened and included it. So in this situation, when I do my Control Shift End, it also includes it. So in these situations where I know my table only exists here, I can just hold this over and drag down my table. And it takes a little while, but Excel will know to stop at approximately where the table ends. And that is the only way that I can tell Excel to not include this, because sometimes when we type outside our tables, that's the most common error that occurs when it comes to creating tables, is that little notes tend to cause the table to disproportionately get added. So now when I click on table after highlighting, it actually identifies the correct data. This is my data. This was a note to our team presentation today. So now when I've done that, I've created my table by just dragging and holding to the very end. I've added my table. I've clicked OK. And now since I've done that, it expanded just a little bit because this was a little bit wider. And that's okay as well. So I'm going to expand back. Now when I go to insert, I can insert my slicers. And oh my goodness, what happened, ladies and gentlemen? I need to make sure that I am attached to that table. So notice what happened here. A common error that occurs why people get upset is because they go and they insert a slicer, but the slicer says, I don't know where your table is. Help us show me where your table is. All you have to do is make sure that you are clicked into your table somewhere, and Excel will know exactly where that is. So again, a big part of this is the practice, and there are little nuances that can throw it off just by typing in a note over here. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my slicer. I want to know all the students who are Hispanic, so I want to add the ethnicity field. And then I also want to know the students that are in the program of study of adult education. So I'm going to click primary program of study here. I get my two slicers that populate. I'll drag them up. And when I click ethnicity equal to Y, and then program of study of adult education, I now see that I have returned 17 rows of data, and I know exactly what I clicked at any given time, and you're able to work through this consistently, and it's very easy for rapid aggregation and disaggregation of your data. So hopefully that gives us a good idea and insight about how slicers are going to work and help our data become better. At any time, if you need to delete them, go ahead and delete your slicers. You can delete them if you like to, but make sure that if you delete, you reset those slicers so that way your data does not stay consistently filtered. So at any time, you can delete your slicers just by holding onto it, clicking, and then deleting, and you're able to work through this data consistently the same way we did before. So now what we want to do is we're going to dive into pivot tables. Pivot tables are very powerful, and once you get the hang of them once, you're always going to want to work with pivot tables. I love working with my pivot tables because they allow us to create visuals without having to do a lot of coding. So I have now jumped over to our attendance by parent ID. So you might have a couple tables over here, but we're going to jump back to our first table, the ones that go A through H. We're on table attendance by parent ed, not ID, parent ed. And I want to identify our student enrollment by program. I want to know how many students do we have in each one of these programs of study. And these are important because we want to know our student populations. And this is where we're going to use the power of our pivot table. So let's go and use a very simple insert function. And when I go to insert, I'm going to say, give me a pivot table. So I'm clicking on insert, clicking on pivot table. And it says, hey, is this the table that I want to use? And it says table one, but you say, where does table one come from? So again, what I do, I click insert pivot table, and it says table one. Ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you that when I came over to our table, we created this. Here is the table name that floats on the left side. So what I did is that I clicked on the table design. When I clicked on the table that we created, it says, here's your table design. This allows you to change colors. It allows you to do some interesting filter options, but we're not going into table designs. We're going to be looking at how we can aggregate our data. What I have now is that I can actually enable our table name. So I could actually just call this special data. And notice I will not be able, I can't use spaces. It's good. If I try to use spaces, it's going to give me an error. So make sure if you label your table name, I'll just call it special for right now. You only use regular characters, so letters and numbers. You can't use special characters or spaces. So you can change the table name at any time too. So if I go back to insert pivot table, it's going to say, oh, now the name of my table is special. And that's correct because that's what I called this table. If you want to go back and change your table name, you can go to table design and just call this table 1. And that works as well. So now quickly, what we're going to do is we're going to insert our pivot table. And it says, what's the table that I want to use? I want to use this table that's on my front page. And notice here how it is highlighting in a green perimeter. It's highlighting in a green perimeter. And it's going through and only highlighting our data. And I do a check sometimes just to make sure that it didn't decide to go a little bit crazy. And it says, where do you want to put this? You can either put it in a new worksheet. It will open up a new tab, or you can put it in an existing worksheet. And I'm going to say, let's put this in a new worksheet. And at this time, we're going to not use the add this data to the data model. We're going to do that next Tech Tuesday. So we'll talk about this little special feature next Tech Tuesday. I'm going to click OK. And now I get this, and it says, oh, here's my pivot table. Mine called sheet 5 because I had different sheets before that I created. Yours may have said sheet 4, sheet 3, depending upon how many copies of your data you presented beforehand. So now what we want to do is that we want to create a visual table that says, I want to know total student enrollment by program. So I want to know total student enrollment by program. Notice my cool little thing went away. If it did, just left click here on your table. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take my primary program of study up here at the top left, and you have the option to design this however you so choose. You can design this however you so choose. You can put this here and drop it as a row. You can drop it as a column or row. So we're designing this as we so see fit. And now it says, well, this is great, but how do I know how to count? I should have using it. Yes, absolutely. You can deselect the outside. Oh, thank you for that, Julie. I didn't realize you could deselect the outside contact by clicking there, but that's an excellent point. Julie, one of our colleagues, recognized that you could deselect on this table the outside content that we have put in by, where is it? Put it here somewhere. There we go. We could delete this outside content by using the arrow keys. So thank you, Julie. Even I learned something every day. So actually, I learned something every day. So now we have to tabulate a value. We want to get a quantity. So now when I do so, I'm going to go ahead and drop student ID into my values. And people say, well, why are you going to put that into your values? And Excel is going to automatically know to count that student ID. Excel is going to know to count that student ID. And that is fantastic for us. So notice what it did, ladies and gentlemen, is that we went through and it identified that same 329 rows of data. We have 329 rows of data. And some people may say, well, didn't you have 330? I start up here at 1, and then I go all the way down to 330. And we did have 330, but interestingly enough, this first row is a row header. It's not really data. So that's the reason why in this circumstance, Excel, this pivot table only says that we have 329 rows of data, or a value of 329 students. And notice down here, it says count of student ID. Excel knew that each one of these student IDs are unique. So we told Excel to count how many student IDs we have. We have to tell Excel to count something. And that's why that student ID is so important for us to be able to aggregate this value. And this is a very powerful tool. We just created a very interesting situation. It's a great table that summarizes all of that data that we had before. We know that we have 226 adult ed students. We have 93 ESOL students. We have 4 ESOL at college career readiness. And then we also have 6 that are adult GED. So this is a quantity, but sometimes, my goodness, sometimes we don't try to generate the pivot table. Sure. So I have a question that needs that wants me to go back and revisit the pivot table. The next step that I'm going to ask, and I'll do that, is that I'm going to say, let's get a percentage of our program. So if you want to try that, while I show how to regenerate, I'll be more than happy to do that. So in order to regenerate, we use this as our table, as our source table. So we went by attendance by parent ed. In this situation now, all we do is we go to insert, Noberto, pivot table. Thank you so much, Nita. I appreciate you. Got a very thoughtful compliment. Insert, pivot table, and now it highlighted my pivot table in green margin there, and a green perimeter. And I'm going to say add my table 1 data as a new sheet. Bam. So I just added a new pivot table. Roberto, hopefully that helped revisit that. But again, let me know if not. Let's keep going into our data dive about our outcomes here. Let's say I have to calculate a percentage. That happens quite a bit where, total values are not very helpful, but percentages are. So the nice part is I don't want to have to calculate. I want to do equal sum, divide by equal sum. That's just too much. Ladies and gentlemen, when I come down here to my count of student ID, you're welcome, Roberto. When I come down here to count of student ID and I left click on that drop down arrow, let's all make sure we're here because this is a very powerful tool because Excel has recognized that you're probably going to do some special calculations like percentage. You're welcome. Thank you so much, friend. I appreciate you. And we will see you next Tuesday. And this is also recorded too. Now I'm going to click on value field settings. And I say, oh, okay, great. It actually gives me some abilities. I can actually do some quick sums and counts and averages and maxes. That's great if we have numerical data, but we don't. This is actually just a text field data. But the nice part here is that when I scroll over to show value as, you can actually tell Excel that I want to do a percentage. I want to do a percentage. So sometimes people don't know, oh, which percentage do I choose? There's so many of them. And you know what? I can tell you sometimes I don't remember either. But the nice part about this is that you can click on them, and if it doesn't work the way you want, you can go and retry it again. So I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to click on percent of grand total. When I click on that and I click OK, I realize that I have this, and this is what I was looking for. I was looking for my percent of grand total. Very helpful. It is something that allows us to figure out quickly what are percentages of this value. So what I can do again, just to show us, is that I left click, I go to value field settings, I come over to show value as, percent of grand total, and I click on that, and I'm able to then change this to a calculation of percentage. So this gives us different abilities to dive into our data because percents of totals are very helpful. And that is not something we had to write, and we were able to do that in our own pivot table. This pivot table is extremely wonderful. Notice there's a lot of things that we can do in this situation. And sorry, I just went and did it, and I didn't even tell you what I was doing. So let's say that we want to look at the counts adjacent to my percentages. That's okay. You can do that too. Remember, we use the student ID to count. We use the student ID to count. When I drop student ID back in here, oh my gosh, look at that. It actually tells me the counts again. I can relist the same fields over and over. So now I'm able to go through and I see that the 226 students makes up 68.69% of our data. And we can work through this and we have a wonderful understanding of our population specific to our programs of study. There's some cool things you can do. You can relabel this. I could call this unduplicated head count, but just by clicking on it, unduplicated head count. I can do that. I can expand this. I could change this to percent. You can do a lot of fantastic things there. See, a great question. How do we change the format so we don't have decimals? I'm assuming that's what's coming in. Absolutely fantastic question. We know that that came from down here. Notice when I change my headers here, it changed them over here so they're easy to determine. When I drop down this arrow and I click on value field settings, I can then come to number format. So doing it one more time on my percent, value field settings, number format. I can click on number and I can reduce the decimal places and click OK. And now when I do so, it reduces and it gives me, oh, it rounds up. One of the fallibilities of that rounding situation. So be very careful about that, but it's something that you can do, and you can change those number formats, which is something that sometimes we want to do. You can look at currency. There's a lot of things that we can do in order to to gain a better understanding of our data. So now let's go ahead in our last 2 minutes. I'm going to ask us to use this situation, and we're going to do a pivot table of the attendance hours by ethnicity. So working fast. I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm just going to not even worry about creating a table. I'm just going to click on Insert. This is in my All Student Data. Insert Pivot Table on my All Student Data. And it has gone ahead and identified all of my student data. It's picked it out for me. I'm down on the 330th row. Again, I'm on my first All Student Data tab. Doing it one more time. I insert on my All Student Data pivot table. Where do I want to put this? I'm going to put this in a new worksheet, and I click OK. Awesome. I feel good about this. I want to do enrollment. No problem, friends. Thank you so much for coming. I understand if you have to go. I want to know total hours attended by ethnicity. So I want to go ahead and find my ethnicity. If you want to search for it quick and not have to worry about scrolling, you can type up here in the search bar. So I'm typing ethnicity. I'm going to drag that into my rows. Now I want to drag my total hours, my field total hours. I don't want to have to go search for it, into my values. And now that I see here that I have my total rows of the hours by ethnicity. And nice thing is here is that we could go through and we could add more fields to this. We could add program of study. We can interpolate and flip these values around. And we can start adding and subtracting them to our data. We can then even go ahead and make changes to our data. And we can tell our data that, you know what, I don't want sum. It defaulted to sum. I actually, I want you to find the average. I want you to find the average. And this average will allow us to then see the differences. So there's a lot of very powerful fields and calculations that can be done using your data. So I hope this has given you a good understanding, or at least a peripheral understanding of how to go through and work with our data on a consistent basis using the power of the pivot table and the power of the slicer. In our next Tech Tuesday, we're going to go through and put this all together to be able to design something that looks like this. This is a great opportunity for us to get your feedback, and I am now going to welcome our IPDAY director, executive director, June, to her comments to wish us all well. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to having you next time. June?
Mike, thank you so much. I tell you what, I learned something every time I hear a presentation from you. So thank you so much. Your feedback is so important to us. So if you would just take 60 seconds to please fill out this survey, we would love to hear what you thought about this webinar today. While you do that, I want to remind you of tomorrow's webinar, which is a simple approach for launching your IETs. So if you're available, I hope you can join us then. And then Mike's part 2 on November 28th, Unlocking Insights, Creating an Excel Dashboard for Adult General Education Data. With that, I want you to know how much all of us here at IPDAY value all of you, and you are all so appreciative. We are so appreciative for everything that you do. So thank you so much. We hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we hope to see you next week or tomorrow. Have a lovely day, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, June. Thank you all to our colleagues.